Commander ZX-4471 floated in the control chamber of the Silent Watch, his pale blue tentacles dancing across the smooth control panels. The ship hung invisible in the darkness between stars, its advanced cloaking systems making it appear like empty space to any scanner. For 3 Earth years he had watched the small blue planet and its strange inhabitants through long-range sensors. Now, finally, the humans were ready to take their first real steps into the galaxy. The Viridians had been watching species develop for over 10,000 years. They were patient observers, members of the Galactic Council who specialized in studying younger races. ZYX-4471 had seen hundreds of species reach this same point in their development. The pattern was always the same. First came the crude rockets, then basic space travel, followed by their first attempts at colonies beyond their home system. Most species took centuries to reach this stage. The humans had done it in less than 200 years. "Commander, the human vessel is approaching the jump point," reported Science Officer QEL-9988, her voice carrying the musical tones of their language. She was young for a Viridian, only 800 years old, and this was her first assignment watching a developing species. ZX-4471 turned his large, dark eyes toward the main display. The human ship appeared on the screen, a crude but functional vessel they called the New Horizon. It was small compared to Galactic Council ships, built from metal and ceramic rather than the living biomaterials most advanced species used, but it was moving under its own power, carrying over 3,000 humans toward the Kepler system. "Fascinating," he murmured, watching the ship's primitive fusion engines push it forward. "They still use controlled explosions for propulsion. How wonderfully inefficient." The ship's captain was a human named Jake Morrison, a male of their species with dark hair and what humans called brown eyes. ZYX-4471 had been studying Morrison's files for months. The human was 42 years old, which was relatively young for their species, and had previously commanded atmospheric aircraft on Earth. Like most humans, he seemed driven by emotions rather than pure logic. "Sir, I'm detecting another human vessel approaching from the opposite direction," QEL-9988 announced. "It's one of their military ships, designation Freedom's Edge." ZYX-4471 single quotes as tentacles rippled with mild interest. The humans had a curious habit of dividing their space efforts between civilian and military purposes. Most species unified these functions early in their development, but humans seemed to enjoy maintaining separate organizations that often competed with each other. The Freedom's Edge was commanded by Captain Lisa Hayes, a human female with short red hair and green eyes. Her ship was larger than the New Horizon, designed for both exploration and defense. Though the humans had never encountered hostile aliens, they seemed to assume such encounters were inevitable. This was another odd trait that set them apart from most species. "The military vessel is transmitting to the colony ship," QEL-9988 reported. "Standard escort protocols, it seems." ZYX-4471 nodded. The humans were sending their first major colony group to establish permanent settlements outside their home system. It was a significant step, one that would determine whether they would become a true spacefaring species or remain trapped in their single solar system like so many others. On the display, both human ships engaged their faster-than-light drives and disappeared into the strange realm they called hyperspace. The technology was crude but functional, allowing them to cross vast distances in days rather than years. ZYX-4471 gave the command to follow, and the Silent Watch slipped into its own version of hyperspace, trailing the humans at a safe distance. "Begin full monitoring protocols," he ordered. "Record everything. The Council will want detailed reports on how humans handle their first real expansion into space." The journey to the Kepler system took 6 days. During this time, ZYX-4471 and his crew observed the humans through their advanced sensors. The colony ship carried families, scientists, engineers, and farmers. Children played in the corridors while adults worked to maintain the ship's systems. It was remarkable how they had packed so much life into such a small space. The military escort maintained constant communication with the colony ship, running regular drills and scanning for potential threats. Captain Hayes seemed particularly focused on defensive preparations, though there was no logical reason to expect danger in this remote system. When they arrived at Kepler, the humans immediately began the process of establishing their colony. They chose a planet they designated Kepler 442b, a world with breathable atmosphere and liquid water. The colonists worked with impressive efficiency, establishing power systems, growing facilities, and communication networks within the first week. They're remarkably adaptable, QEL 9988 observed, watching human engineers modify their equipment to work in the planet's slightly different gravitational field. Most species take months to establish a functional colony. ZYX4471 agreed. The humans showed an unusual talent for rapid adaptation and problem-solving. When their original landing site proved unstable, they simply moved to a new location and began again. When local weather patterns disrupted their power systems, they redesigned the equipment within days. Captain Morrison established the colony's command center in a converted section of the New Horizon, while Captain Hayes positioned the Freedom's Edge in orbit as a protective guardian. The division of responsibilities seemed to work well for their species, though ZX4471 found their command structure oddly complex. Over the following months, the human colony grew steadily. They built manufacturing facilities, research stations, and living quarters. More ships arrived from Earth, carrying additional colonists and supplies. The humans seemed determined to create a permanent presence in the system, not just a temporary outpost. "Sir," QEL 9988 said one day, her voice carrying a note of concern. "I'm detecting ships approaching from the galactic south. They're not human." ZYX4471 immediately focused on the new contacts. The ships were sleek, dark, and obviously military in design. He recognized them instantly as Zephyrian vessels belonging to one of the more aggressive species in this sector of the galaxy. "How many ships?" he asked. 12 capital ships, sir. They're heading directly for the human colony." ZX4471's tentacles went still. The Zephyrians were known for their territorial nature and their tendency to eliminate potential threats before they became problems. They had probably detected the human expansion and decided to act before the humans could establish themselves as a regional power. "This is unfortunate," he murmured. The humans are about to face their first contact with a hostile alien species. Given their technological disadvantage, this will likely be their last contact as well. The Zephyrian fleet moved with deadly purpose toward the unsuspecting human colony. ZYX4471 prepared to record what would probably be humanity's final chapter in space. The warning came at 0347 hours, ship time. Captain Lisa Hayes was reviewing duty rosters in her quarters aboard the Freedom's Edge when the communication alert pierced the quiet hum of the ship's systems. She rolled out of her bunk and pressed the response button, her red hair still messy from sleep. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission," came the voice of Lieutenant Ben Carter from the bridge. "It's not from Earth or the colony. The signal is coming from outside the system." Hayes pulled on her uniform and hurried to the bridge. The main screen showed a dark, angular ship that looked nothing like human technology. Its hull was black as deep space, covered in sharp edges and weapon ports. Behind it, 11 more ships hung in formation, their size making the Freedom's Edge look like a toy. "Put the transmission through," Hayes ordered. Settling into her command chair, the screen filled with the image of an alien face. The creature had gray skin, 4 arms, and eyes that glowed with orange light. When it spoke, the ship's computer translated its words into English, though the voice remained cold and mechanical. "Attention human vessels. I am War Commander Thekmol of the Zephyrian Empire. You have violated our territorial space and established illegal settlements. You will remove all humans from this system within 30 of your Earth days. Failure to comply will result in the complete destruction of your species." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Hayes stared at the empty screen, her mind racing. First contact with an alien species, and it was a threat of extinction. Make Captain Morrison on the colony, she ordered. And send an emergency message to Earth Command. They need to know what's happening. On the planet below, Captain Morrison was already dealing with the crisis. The colony's communication center buzzed with activity as technicians worked to establish contact with Earth. Morrison stood in the middle of the chaos, his face grim as he read the alien ultimatum for the third time. "Sir, we're getting reports from all the settlements," reported Chief Engineer Pete Sullivan, a tall man with graying hair who had become Morrison's unofficial second in command. "Everyone wants to know if we're really going to abandon everything we've built." Morrison looked through the window at the colony they had spent months creating. Families had made homes here. Children played in the carefully tended gardens. Scientists worked in laboratories that were producing discoveries that could change human understanding of the universe. The idea of abandoning it all seemed impossible. "What's our defensive capability?" Morrison asked. Sullivan shook his head. "We have construction equipment, some mining explosives, and whatever weapons the military escort brought. Against 12 warships, we might as well throw rocks." Aboard the Silent Watch, Commander 64471 observed the human response with scientific interest. His species had witnessed this scenario hundreds of times with different races. The pattern was always the same. The weaker species would realize they had no choice but to retreat, negotiate, or face annihilation. Most chose retreat. "The humans are transmitting to their homeworld," reported QEL 9988. "Standard emergency protocols." "They're requesting instructions?" "From their government," ZYX4471 nodded. "As expected. They will receive orders to withdraw within a few days. The humans are emotional, but they're not suicidal. They understand basic mathematics." The response from Earth took 18 hours to arrive. Admiral Roy Jackson, the head of Earth Space Command, appeared on screens throughout the human colony and aboard the Freedom's Edge. He was an older man with silver hair and hard eyes that had seen too many battles on Earth. "To all personnel in the Kepler system," Jackson said, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation, "we have received reports of the alien ultimatum. After consulting with world leaders and military advisors, Earth Command has reached a decision." Hayes leaned forward in her chair. Morrison gathered his staff around the communication console. Even the Viridian observers focused their attention on the transmission. "The answer is no," Jackson continued. "We will not abandon our people or our colonies. Humanity has worked too hard to reach the stars to retreat at the first sign of opposition. All personnel are ordered to prepare for defensive operations. Reinforcements are being prepared and will depart Earth within 48 hours." The transmission ended, leaving another moment of stunned silence. Hayes felt her heart racing. Morrison's staff looked at each other with expressions of disbelief and determination. "He's insane," whispered one of Morrison's technicians. "We can't fight 12 warships with mining equipment?" "No," Morrison said quietly, "but we can try." On the Silent Watch, 64471 stared at the display in confusion. His tentacles writhed with agitation as he processed what he had just heard. In his 1,000 years of observing species, he had never seen such a response to overwhelming odds. "Commander," QEL 9988 said, her voice uncertain, "perhaps we misunderstood the transmission. Surely they don't intend to actually fight." ZYX4471 checked his translation systems twice. There was no error. The humans had been given a choice between retreat and extinction, and they had chosen to fight. It defied all logical analysis. "Begin detailed recordings of everything," he ordered. "This is unprecedented. The Council will need to study this behavior pattern." The next 24 hours brought a transformation that amazed the Viridian observers. The human colony, which had been focused on peaceful expansion and scientific research, suddenly became a military installation. Morrison organized the colonists into defensive units. Scientists began working on weapon modifications. Engineers started converting mining equipment into improvised weapons. Dr. Amy Foster, the colony's chief scientist, led a team that began developing explosive devices using the mining charges they had brought for excavation work. Her laboratory, which had been studying plant samples the day before, now resembled a weapons factory. "We can increase the yield by 30% if we modify the detonation sequence," she explained to Morrison, her hands covered in chemical residue. "It won't be enough to destroy a warship, but it might damage their shields." Hayes worked with her crew to modify the Freedom's Edge for combat. The ship had been designed for escort duty, not fleet battles, but they installed additional weapon systems and reinforced the hull as much as possible. Lieutenant Carter led teams that removed non-essential systems to make room for more ammunition. "We're going to get one shot at this," Hayes told her officers. "When those ships come for us, we need to make it count." The Zephyrian fleet waited at the edge of the system, confident in their overwhelming superiority. War Commander Thek Mol had given the humans time to consider their position. He expected them to see reason and withdraw when the deadline passed. With no sign of human retreat, he prepared his forces for what he assumed would be a brief and decisive battle. "The humans are actually going to fight us," Thek Mol told his officers, his forearms gesturing with amusement. "How entertaining. We will destroy them quickly and move on to more important matters." Commander Zix 4471 continued his observations, recording everything for the historical archives. He had no doubt about the outcome. The humans would fight bravely, as most species did when cornered, but they would be destroyed within hours. It was simple mathematics. What he didn't understand was why the humans looked so determined instead of desperate. They worked with focused intensity, as if they believed they could actually win. It was illogical, but it was also fascinating. The storm was about to begin. The attack began at dawn on the planet's surface. War Commander Thek Mol led his fleet in a standard formation, confident that the humans would surrender once they saw the full power of Zephyrian military might. 12 massive warships dropped out of hyperspace and moved toward the colony with deadly purpose. Captain Hayes watched the enemy ships approach on her sensors. The Freedom's Edge hung in orbit above the colony, its weapons powered and ready. She knew her single ship could not defeat 12 warships, but she also knew she had to try. "All stations, battle alert," she announced over the ship's communication system. "This is what we train for. Make every shot count." Lieutenant Carter worked at the weapons console, his hands steady despite the fear in his eyes. The ship's missile tubes were loaded with their most powerful weapons, though they seemed pathetically small compared to the massive alien vessels approaching them. "Enemy ships are in range," Carter reported. "Waiting for your orders, Captain." Hayes took a deep breath. "Fire everything." The Freedom's Edge launched its entire missile supply in the first salvo. Bright streaks of light crossed the darkness between the ships, seeking their targets. The human weapons struck the lead Zephyrian vessel, exploding against its shields in bursts of orange flame. The alien ship shuddered but continued forward, its hull barely scratched. "Direct hits but minimal damage," Carter reported. "Their shields are too strong." The Zephyrian response was immediate and devastating. Energy beams lanced out from the alien ships, striking the Freedom's Edge with tremendous force. The human ship's shields collapsed instantly, and the hull began to buckle under the assault. "Hull breach on decks 4 and 5, someone shouted over the noise of alarms. "We're losing atmosphere." Hayes gripped her command chair as the ship shook violently. She could feel the Freedom's Edge dying around her, but she refused to give up. "Return fire. Use everything we have." On the planet below, Captain Morrison watched the space battle through the colony's sensors. The Freedom's Edge was clearly outmatched, but it continued to fight with desperate courage. He turned to his staff, knowing that the ground battle would begin soon. "All defensive positions are ready," reported Chief Engineer Sullivan. "We've placed the mining charges along the main approaches to the colony. Dr. Foster's team has the improvised weapons ready." Morrison nodded. Remember, we're not trying to win, we're trying to make them pay for every inch of ground. Zephyrian. Ships finished destroying the Freedom's Edge with ruthless efficiency. The human vessel broke apart in a series of explosions, its crew lost in the cold vacuum of space. Captain Hayes died at her post, still giving orders to her crew until the very end. War Commander Thekmol watched the destruction with satisfaction. The humans had fought bravely, but the outcome had never been in doubt. Now his forces would land on the planet and eliminate the colony. It would be over within hours. Deploy the ground forces, he ordered. Standard occupation protocols. Eliminate all resistance. Commander 64471. Observed the battle from the safety of the silent watch. The human response had been exactly what he expected. They had fought with courage but had been quickly overwhelmed by superior technology. Now the real tragedy would begin as the Zephyrians eliminated the defenseless colonists. The orbital battle is over, he reported to Kel 9988. The humans fought better than expected, but the outcome was inevitable. Begin recording the ground assault. The first Zephyrian landing ships descended through the planet's atmosphere like falling stars. They carried elite warriors armed with energy weapons and protected by advanced armor. Against human colonists with improvised weapons, it should have been a massacre. Instead, the aliens walked into a nightmare. The first landing zone was a carefully chosen trap. Morrison had evacuated the area but left the buildings intact, making it appear to be a normal settlement. The Zephyrian warriors spread out in standard formation. Expecting minimal resistance, the mining charges detonated simultaneously, turning the entire landing zone into a crater of fire and debris. The explosion was so powerful that it could be seen from orbit. Half of the first wave of alien soldiers disappeared in the blast. What was that? Thekmol demanded, staring at the mushroom cloud rising from the planet's surface. The humans. They destroyed their own settlement, his tactical officer reported, confusion clear in his voice. They turned it into a weapon. The second wave of Zephyrian troops landed more carefully, but they found no easy targets. The humans had abandoned their fixed positions and were fighting from hidden locations throughout the colony. Every building had been turned into a fortress. Every street had become a killing ground. Dr. Foster's modified explosives proved devastatingly effective. The scientist had turned simple mining charges into sophisticated weapons that could penetrate Zephyrian armor. Her team moved through the colony's underground tunnels, striking at the alien forces and disappearing before they could respond. We're not trying to hold territory, she explained to her team as they prepared another attack. We're trying to make them afraid to take it. The Zephyrian warriors, trained for conventional warfare, found themselves facing an enemy that refused to fight conventionally. The humans appeared from nowhere, struck with savage efficiency, and vanished before the aliens could retaliate. Every advance cost the invaders dearly. Commander 64471 watched the ground battle with growing amazement. The humans were vastly outnumbered and outgunned, but they were winning. Their tactics were unlike anything in the Galactic Councils. Military databases? They're not fighting to win, he told Kel 9988. They're fighting to make the enemy lose. Captain Morrison coordinated the defense from a hidden command center deep beneath the colony. His communication system allowed him to direct the scattered human forces, but he could see that they were slowly being pushed back. The Zephyrians were adapting to human tactics, becoming more cautious and methodical. We need to do something. They won't expect, he told Sullivan. Something that will shake their confidence. Sullivan's response was grim. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. The chief engineer's plan was desperate and dangerous. The colony's main power plant could be overloaded, creating an explosion that would destroy everything within a 5-kilometer radius. It would eliminate a large portion of the Zephyrian ground forces, but it would also destroy the heart of the human colony. Do it, Morrison ordered without hesitation. Sullivan and his team began the overload sequence while the remaining colonists evacuated to the outer settlements. The Zephyrians, sensing human movement, concentrated their forces around the power plant. Believing they were about to capture the colony's most important facility, the explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. The power plant detonated, with the force of a small nuclear weapon, creating a crater where the colony's center had once stood. The blast eliminated over 200 Zephyrian warriors in an instant. War Commander Thekmol stared at the destruction in disbelief. The humans had destroyed their own colony rather than let it fall into enemy hands. His forces had captured nothing but radioactive ruins. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the human survivors." Morrison's voice came through the speakers, calm despite the devastation around him. "This is Captain Morrison of the human colony. We want to negotiate." Thekmol's forearms gestured with anger. "You have nothing left to negotiate with. Your colony is destroyed. Your defenses are broken." "That's where you're wrong, Morrison," replied. "We've shown you what we're willing to do to defend our home. Now imagine what we'll do to attack yours." The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian commander staring at the crater that had once been a thriving human settlement. For the first time in his military career, he felt something he had never experienced before: fear. On the silent watch, Commander Zix4471 began to understand that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans had not just fought bravely, they had fought with a terrible creativity that defied all logical analysis. "Record everything," he ordered. "The Council needs to see this." The reinforcements from Earth arrived 7 days after the first battle. Admiral Roy Jackson led a fleet of 43 ships, everything that Earth could spare for the defense of their distant colony. The vessels were a mix of military escorts, converted cargo ships, and civilian vessels that had been hastily armed with whatever weapons the factories could produce. War Commander Thekmol watched the human fleet approach with confidence. 43 ships seemed like a large number, but most of them were clearly not designed for combat. His 12 remaining warships were still more than enough to destroy the entire human force. "Deploy in standard battle formation," he ordered his fleet commanders. "We will end this quickly and return to more important matters." Admiral Jackson stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Defiant, studying the enemy positions. He was a veteran of Earth's wars, but he had never faced alien technology before. The reports from the colony had been disturbing. The humans had fought well on the ground, but they had lost their only real warship in the first exchange. "All ships, this is Admiral Jackson," he announced over the fleet communication system. "We're not here to win a fair fight. We're here to make sure these aliens regret ever threatening human space." Dr. Amy Foster had been evacuated from the colony along with the other survivors. Now she worked aboard the converted research vessel Discovery, leading a team that was developing new weapons based on what they had learned from the ground battle. Her laboratory was a maze of cables, chemical tanks, and half-finished devices that looked more like torture equipment than scientific instruments. "The alien shields are strong against energy weapons," she explained to Admiral Jackson during a briefing, "but they're not designed to handle multiple simultaneous impacts. If we can hit them with enough projectiles at once, we can overwhelm their defenses." Chief Engineer Pete Sullivan had also been rescued from the colony. He worked with Foster's team to modify the human ships, turning them into weapons that violated every principle of safe spacecraft design. His modifications were crude but effective, trading crew safety for destructive power. "We're removing all the safety systems," he told the ship captains during their briefing. "Life support, hull integrity, radiation shielding. Everything goes to weapons and engines. The ships will be death traps, but they'll hit harder than anything the aliens expect." The human fleet moved to engage the Zephyrian ships in a formation that puzzled the alien commanders. Instead of the tight, defensive arrangements that most species used, the humans spread out in a loose, seemingly random pattern. Their ships moved independently, each following its own course toward the enemy. "They're not coordinating their attack," observed Thekmol's tactical officer. "It's like they're not even trying to work together," Thekmol agreed. The human formation looked chaotic and disorganized. Perhaps they're as primitive as their technology suggests. Begin the attack. The Zephyrian fleet fired their opening salvo, energy beams lancing out toward the approaching human ships. The aliens expected to destroy several vessels with the first strike, but the humans' scattered formation made targeting difficult. Only 3 human ships were hit, and they continued to fight even as their hulls burned. What happened next shocked the Zephyrian commanders. The damaged human ships didn't retreat or try to save themselves. Instead, they accelerated toward the alien fleet, their engines overloading as they prepared for collision courses. "They're going to ram us," someone shouted on the Zephyrian command channel. Admiral Jackson watched from the Defiant as the converted cargo ship Thunder Bay sacrificed itself against a Zephyrian cruiser. The human vessel struck the alien ships' shields with tremendous force, overloading the defensive systems and allowing the following ships to pour weapons fire into the exposed hull. "All ships, execute Foster Protocol," Jackson ordered. The Foster Protocol was Dr. Foster's masterpiece of destructive innovation. Instead of traditional missiles, the human ships fired clouds of small projectiles, each one guided by a simple targeting system. The projectiles were too small and numerous for the alien point defense systems to stop, and they struck the Zephyrian shields like metal rain. The alien shields, designed to stop large energy weapons, couldn't handle thousands of small impacts. They flickered and failed, leaving the Zephyrian hulls exposed to human weapons fire. Commander Zix4471 watched the battle with growing amazement. The humans were using tactics he had never seen before. They fought as if every ship was expendable, as if the only thing that mattered was inflicting damage on the enemy. "They're not trying to preserve their fleet," he told Kel 9988. "They're using their ships as weapons." The second phase of the battle began when the human ships that had survived the initial exchange began to implement Sullivan's modifications. The chief engineer had designed a system he called the Hellfire Protocol, which diverted all power from life support systems to weapons and engines. The crews of these ships had volunteered for what amounted to suicide missions. They would fight at maximum power for as long as their air and heat lasted, then die when their life support failed. But in those few minutes, they would hit harder than any ship their size had a right to. The converted passenger liner New Hope was the first to activate the Hellfire Protocol. The ship's weapons output doubled, then tripled as power flowed from the dying life support systems. The vessel poured fire into a Zephyrian battleship, its guns overheating and burning out one by one as the crew fought with desperate fury. Life support failure in 30 seconds. The ship's computer announced calmly. Captain Rick Barnes, the New Hope's commander, ignored the warning. "Keep firing, make it count." The ship's final salvo punched through the Zephyrian battleship's hull, triggering a cascade of explosions that tore the alien vessel apart. The New Hope drifted silent and dark, its crew dead at their posts. But their sacrifice had eliminated one of the enemy's most powerful ships. War. Commander Thek Mol watched his fleet being systematically destroyed by an enemy that should have been easily defeated. The humans fought with a savagery that defied all military logic. They used their ships as missiles, their crews as expendable resources, and their technology as instruments of mutual destruction. "Sir, we're losing ships faster than we can replace them," his tactical officer reported. "The humans are not fighting like any species we've encountered." Thek Mol's forearms trembled with rage and fear. "They're insane. They're destroying themselves to hurt us." The third phase of the battle began when Admiral Jackson implemented the final part of his plan. The human ships that were too damaged to continue fighting were not evacuated. Instead, their crews programmed them to continue the battle as automated weapons. The Ghost Fleet, as the humans called it, consisted of 23 ships that had been converted into guided missiles. They moved with the precision of machines, seeking out Zephyrian vessels and ramming them with calculated efficiency. The alien crews found themselves fighting an enemy that felt no fear, no pain, and no desire for self-preservation. Dr. Foster watched the battle from the safety of the Discovery's laboratory. Her weapons had performed better than she had hoped, but she felt no satisfaction. The cost of victory was written in the burning hulks of human ships and the names of crews who would never return home. "How many more ships do we have?" she asked Sullivan. The engineer's face was grim. "Enough. The question is whether we have enough crews willing to die for this." The answer came from the communication system. Volunteers from Earth were already on their way. More ships were being converted for battle, and the human industrial base was shifting entirely to war production. The species that had been focused on peaceful exploration just weeks ago had transformed into something dedicated entirely to destruction on the silent watch. Commander Zix4471 began to understand that he was witnessing the birth of something unprecedented in galactic history. The humans were not just fighting a war. They were becoming something new, something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. "Record everything," he ordered again. "The Council needs to know what humanity is becoming." The battle continued, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. The Zephyrian fleet was being systematically destroyed by an enemy that fought with the fury of a species that had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The Zephyrian Empire's response to their fleet's destruction was swift and overwhelming. War Commander Thekmol's desperate transmission reached the Imperial High Command within hours of his defeat. The message was simple but shocking. The humans were not like other species. They fought with a madness that defied all military understanding. Emperor Vex Prime, ruler of the Zephyrian Empire, called an emergency council meeting. His advisors gathered in the great war chamber, their forearms gesturing with agitation as they discussed the impossible reports from the frontier. 3,000 ships, announced War Marshal Kextor, the Empire's supreme military commander. "Every vessel we can spare from the core worlds. We will crush these humans completely and make an example of them for the rest of the galaxy." The largest fleet in Zephyrian history began moving toward human space. 3,000 warships, carrying the most elite warriors in the Empire, supported by weapons that could destroy planets. The humans had won one battle through desperate tactics and sacrifice, but no species could stand against such overwhelming force. Admiral Roy Jackson received the intelligence reports aboard the Defiant as his surviving ships limped back toward Earth. The news was devastating. 3,000 enemy ships were approaching, and humanity had barely survived fighting 12. "How long do we have?" he asked his intelligence officer. 6 weeks, sir." "Maybe 8 if they stop to resupply," Jackson nodded grimly. 6 weeks, too. Prepare for a battle that would determine whether humanity survived as a species. He opened a communication channel to Earth Command. "This is Admiral Jackson. Implement Protocol Omega immediately. Authorization code, Broken Arrow." Protocol Omega was humanity's most desperate contingency plan, developed in secret by Earth's military leadership. It called for the complete mobilization of human civilization for war. Every resource, every ship, every person would be dedicated to the coming fight. Dr. Amy Foster was recalled to Earth along with Chief Engineer Pete Sullivan and the other survivors of the Kepler battle. They were taken to a secret facility beneath the Rocky Mountains, where humanity's brightest minds were working on projects that would have been considered impossible just months earlier. "We need weapons," Foster was told by General Kate Miller, the head of Earth's military research division. "Not just ship weapons, we need to think bigger." The laboratory complex was vast, filled with scientists and engineers working on technologies that pushed the boundaries of physics, Foster found herself leading a team developing something they called stellar engineering, the ability to use stars themselves as weapons. "The idea is simple," she explained to Sullivan as they reviewed the preliminary designs. "We can't match their ships, but we can change the battlefield itself. If we can control asteroid fields, we can trap their fleets. If we can destabilize stars, we can destroy entire star systems." Sullivan stared at the plans with a mixture of awe and horror. "Amy, this isn't just war. This is cosmic vandalism." "They started it," Foster replied, her voice cold with determination. "They threatened to exterminate our entire species. Now they'll learn what that really means." The project that emerged from the mountain laboratory was called the Doomsday Fleet, It consisted of automated ships designed to hunt and destroy Zephyrian worlds for generations after humanity's defeat. The ships were programmed with one simple mission. If Earth fell, they would ensure that the Zephyrian Empire followed it into extinction. Captain Jake Morrison, who had survived the colony's destruction, found himself commanding one of these vessels. The ship was called the Vengeance, and it carried enough firepower to sterilize a planet. More importantly, it carried a message that would be transmitted to every Zephyrian world it found. This is humanity's final gift to the Zephyrian Empire, Morrison recorded. You chose to threaten our extinction. Now, even in death, we will return the favor. This ship is one of many. We will hunt your worlds until the stars burn out. Commander Zix4471 watched the human preparations with growing alarm. His sensors detected the massive fleet movements, the industrial mobilization, and the energy signatures of weapons that violated several galactic treaties. The humans were not just preparing for war, they were preparing for mutual annihilation. They're going to destroy everything, he told Kel 9988, not just themselves, not just the Zephyrians. They're willing to damage entire star systems to win. This war, the Viridian scientist could barely comprehend what she was seeing. Sir, should we alert the Galactic Council? This level of destruction could affect other species. Zix4471 considered the option, but the Council's non-interference policy was absolute. They could observe and record, but they could not act. Continue. Monitoring, the galaxy needs to know what happened here. The Zephyrian fleet arrived at the edge of human space exactly 6 weeks after leaving their home worlds. Emperor Vex Prime had come personally to oversee the destruction of humanity, bringing with him the pride and power of an empire that had conquered dozens of species. The human fleet that met them was unlike anything they had faced before. Admiral Jackson commanded over 200 ships, but these vessels bore little resemblance to normal spacecraft. They had been modified beyond recognition, turned into weapons that existed solely to inflict damage on the enemy. They look like flying coffins, observed War Marshal Kextor. Studying the approaching human ships. Emperor Vex Prime agreed. The human vessels seemed designed more for destruction than survival. Their hulls bristled with weapons, their engines glowed with dangerous overload signatures, and their movement patterns suggested crews that had abandoned all hope of returning home. The battle began with humanity's opening move, something they called the Asteroid Gambit. Dr. Foster's team had spent weeks positioning mining charges throughout the asteroid field at the edge of the solar system. When the Zephyrian fleet entered the field, the charges detonated simultaneously. The explosions sent millions of rocks flying at tremendous speeds, turning the entire region into a deadly maze. The Zephyrian ships, designed for open space combat, found themselves trapped in a storm of debris that tore at their hulls and disrupted their formations. Clever, admitted Kextor, watching his ships struggle through the asteroid storm, but it won't save them. The Zephyrian fleet pressed forward, their superior shields and armor allowing them to survive the bombardment. But the asteroids were only the beginning of humanity's plan. The second phase began when human ships started ramming asteroids into the Zephyrian formations. The Orcs, guided by suicide crews, struck with the force of nuclear weapons. Each impact eliminated multiple enemy vessels, but it also cost the lives of the human crews who guided them. They're using their entire solar system as a weapon, Vex Prime observed with grudging admiration. These humans are more resourceful than we expected. The third phase of the battle showcased Foster's most terrifying innovation. Human ships began targeting the system's star itself, using focused energy beams to destabilize the solar fusion process. The star began to flicker and pulse, threatening to either collapse or explode. They're willing to destroy their own sun. To stop us, Kextor reported, his voice filled with disbelief. The implications were staggering. If the star exploded, it would sterilize the entire solar system, destroying both the human homeworld and any Zephyrian ships in the area. If it collapsed, It would create a black hole that could affect neighboring star systems. Emperor Vex Prime stared at the readings in horror. They're insane. They would rather destroy everything than surrender? Morrison's Vengeance and the other Doomsday ships launched during the battle's climax. They disappeared into hyperspace, carrying their automated crews and their terrible message toward Zephyrian space. Even if humanity lost the battle, the war would continue for generations. Sir, Morrison's communication officer reported as the Vengeance entered hyperspace, we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian fleet. The message was from Emperor Vex Prime himself. His forearms trembled as he spoke, and his orange eyes showed something that Zephyrians rarely experienced: fear. Human commanders, we propose a ceasefire. Your tactics have proven ... effective. Perhaps we can reach an understanding. Admiral Jackson's response was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring that every ship in both fleets could hear it. The only understanding we need is this: humanity will not be threatened, we will not be conquered, and we will not be stopped. If you want to end this war, you know what you have to do. The silence that followed lasted for 17 minutes. Finally, Emperor Vex Prime transmitted the order that would change galactic history. All Zephyrian ships withdraw from human space. Set course for home. We will not engage this species again. Commander Zix4471 recorded the moment for the archives, knowing that he had witnessed something unprecedented. For the first time in galactic history, a major empire had retreated not because they were defeated, but because they were terrified of what victory would cost. The Zephyrian fleet disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind a human solar system that barely resembled what it had been just months earlier. The asteroid field was a shattered ruin, filled with the wreckage of both human and alien ships. The sun flickered with unnatural light, its fusion process disrupted by the weapons that humanity had turned against it. Earth itself remained intact, but the planet's children had been forever changed by what they had done to survive. Admiral Roy Jackson stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching the last enemy ship vanish from his sensors. Victory should have felt sweet, but all he felt was exhaustion and a deep sadness for the prices they had paid. Around him, his bridge crew worked in silence, their faces showing the same hollow expression that marked all the survivors. "Send a message to all ships," Jackson ordered. "The enemy has withdrawn. The war is over." The celebration that followed was muted. Across the human fleet, crews embraced and wept, but their joy was mixed with the knowledge of what they had become. They had started the war as explorers and colonists. They ended it as something else entirely, something that frightened even themselves. Dr. Amy Foster sat in her laboratory aboard the Discovery, staring at the weapons she had created. The stellar engineering equipment was still active, still capable of turning stars into weapons. The knowledge of how to build such devices was now part of human civilization, a terrible gift that could never be taken back. "We won," Chief Engineer Pete Sullivan said, entering the laboratory. His voice carried no triumph, only a weary acknowledgement of survival. Foster nodded without looking up from her work. "Yes, we won, but look what we had to become to do it." The reconstruction of human space began immediately, but it was reconstruction with a purpose. The colonies that were rebuilt included massive defensive systems. The ships that rolled out of the factories were designed for war, not exploration. Humanity had learned that the galaxy was not a safe place, and they intended to be ready for whatever came next. Captain Jake Morrison returned from his mission aboard the Vengeance 6 months after the war's end. The Doomsday ship had visited 3 Zephyrian worlds, delivering its message of eternal vengeance before returning to human space. The automated systems that could have continued the hunt indefinitely were finally shut down, but the threat remained real. "They know we're out there," Morrison reported to Admiral Jackson. "The Zephyrians have sealed their borders. They're not expanding anymore? They're afraid of what we might do if they get too close to human space again." Jackson accepted the report with grim satisfaction. The war was over, but its effects would last for generations. Humanity had proven that they were too dangerous to threaten, but they had also proven that they were too dangerous to ignore. Commander ZYX4471 compiled his final report on the human conflict 3 standard galactic years after the war's end. The document was classified at the highest levels by the Galactic Council, deemed too sensitive for general distribution. Only the most senior leaders of member species were allowed to read the full analysis. The humans represent a fundamental change in galactic politics, ZYX4471 wrote. They do not fight wars to achieve political objectives. They fight wars to ensure that losing means everyone loses. This makes them effectively unconquerable, but it also makes them extremely dangerous neighbors. The report detailed humanity's innovations in warfare, from the basic ramming tactics to the stellar engineering projects that could destroy entire star systems. Each development was analyzed and cataloged, creating a manual of terror that would influence galactic military thinking for centuries. Most concerning is their willingness to sacrifice everything for victory, the report continued. They turned their own solar system into a weapon. They created automated fleets designed to continue fighting after their defeat. They proved that they would rather destroy the galaxy than accept conquest. QEL 9988, now promoted to full commander after her experiences with the Human Observation Mission, helped prepare the final recommendations. The Galactic Council's response to humanity would shape interstellar relations for generations to come. We recommend immediate non-aggression treaties with the human government, she wrote. Any species that threatens humanity should be warned that they risk not just war, but potential extinction. The humans have proven that they will escalate any conflict to its ultimate conclusion. The Galactic Council's official response came in the form of a formal invitation to join the interstellar community. Humanity was offered full membership with all the rights and protections that entailed. The invitation was unprecedented, as no species had ever been offered membership based on fear rather than achievement. Admiral Jackson, now serving as Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council, read the invitation with mixed feelings. Humanity had wanted to reach the stars and find their place among the galactic community. They had succeeded, but not in the way they had hoped. We accept the Council's invitation, he announced during the formal ceremony on the Council's home world, but we come not as conquerors or as subjects. We come as equals, and we expect to be treated as such. The other species in the Council chamber listened to his words with respectful attention. None of them wanted to test humanity's resolve again. The Zephyrian representative, War Marshal Kextor, had specifically requested that his species be seated as far from the human delegation as possible. Dr. Foster, now heading Earth's new Department of Stellar Defense, continued her research but with a different focus. Instead of creating weapons, she worked on defenses and deterrence. The goal was no longer to destroy enemies, but to make attacking humanity so costly that no rational species would attempt it. We can't uninvent what we learned during the war, she explained to her research team, but we can make sure that everyone knows the consequences of forcing us to use it. The human colonies that were rebuilt in the years following the war were different from the peaceful settlements that had existed before. They were fortified worlds, capable of defending themselves and equipped with weapons that could threaten entire star systems. Humanity had learned to prepare for war even in times of peace. Morrison, now an admiral himself, commanded the new colonial defense force. His ships patrolled human space with constant vigilance, watching for any sign of new threats. The crews were trained not just in combat, but in the terrible tactics that had won humanity's first war. We hope we never have to use what we learned, Morrison told his officers during a training exercise. But if we do, we'll be ready. Commander ZYX4471 continued to observe humanity from his new post as the Galactic Council's expert on human affairs. His ship, now called the Peaceful Watch, maintained a respectful distance from human space while monitoring their activities. What he saw both impressed and disturbed him. They're still the same species, he noted in his personal log. They still explore, they still create, they still dream of reaching the stars. But underneath all of that, there's something new. Something that knows exactly how to destroy enemies so completely that victory becomes meaningless. The galaxy had changed forever. Species that had once expanded freely now checked their borders carefully, making sure they didn't accidentally threaten human interests. Trade routes were adjusted to avoid human space unless specifically invited. Military planners across the galaxy studied human tactics and tried to develop counters, but none were confident they would work. Years passed. The immediate memories of the war faded, but its lessons remained. Humanity grew and expanded always, welcomed but never challenged. They became known as the species that had won their first war not through superior technology or numbers, but through the simple willingness to ensure that everyone would lose if they did. Commander ZYX-4471, now, old even by Viridian standards, made his final entry in the human observation logs 50 years after the war's end. "We came to watch a young species take its first steps into the galaxy," he wrote. "Instead, we witnessed the birth of something that has changed the nature of galactic civilization forever. They fought their first war with such determination that their enemies chose retreat over victory. And now, decades later, we still don't sleep easily, knowing what they're capable of when cornered. Humanity proved that sometimes the greatest victory is making your enemies too afraid to fight you at all. They didn't just win their first war. They ended the possibility of anyone wanting to start a second one. We witnessed humanity's first war, and the memory will haunt the galaxy forever.